Hi, I'm Martin Kelly of Friends Journal, and we're having another Quaker author chat today. And with me today is Micah MacColl Nicholson. Welcome, Micah.
Thank you for having me, Martin.
Sure. And I'll read your bio from the article. Well, first, the article is "What Kind of Quaker Am I?" And the bio, Micah MacColl Nicholson, she, they, served as Quaker Engagement Program Associate at Friends Committee on National Legislation for the 2023-2024 year. In that role, she advocated for Quaker voices within the organization and strengthened relationships with established and new Quaker networks nationwide. Micah graduated with honors from Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana in 2023. So it sounds like you're very busy among Quakers, Quaker College there and a Quaker organization. So tell me, what kind of Quaker are you? What's some of the Quaker touch points that you've had in your life?
Yeah, so the article in itself is what kind of Quaker am I? And I start out talking a little bit about my history with Quakerism. So I grew up as a Quaker, as a part of Media Monthly Meeting, a part of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, right outside of Philadelphia.
Mhm.
And my parents are both Quakers, one from the Nicholson kind of long line of Quakers. So I have as I say, really long family history with the
Of the old
religion.
Quaker families, yeah, sure.
Yep. Yep. And then my mom's family, her mom and her dad were both Episcopal ministers in Connecticut and Texas.
Mhm.
So on both sides of my family, I have pretty strong religious ties and spiritual foundation to come out of.
Mhm.
So I was raised Quaker and I really enjoyed experiencing what that community brought. But up until the past couple of years, I didn't really know what that meant for me. I knew that it was really important to my dad and some of my siblings and other people that I was spending a lot of time with, either at Earlham. I was also a Quaker youth group leader while I was at Richmond. So I was doing this work and I was enjoying it, but I wasn't claiming the identity of a Quaker because I didn't really know what that meant.
Sure, yeah. And for those who might not know, Earlham is one of the traditional Quaker colleges and still has a pretty strong Quaker identity. Mhm.
Yeah, so this piece actually started back in May of this year with the three paragraphs about me struggling with the peace testimony, me struggling with bringing a book to meeting for worship, and then also struggling with the distinction of the capital and lowercase friends that we use because the capital F friends is Quakers, synonymous with Quakers, but friends is your friends,
Yeah,
the friends that you have across the world.
yeah.
Um, and so this was throughout the year that I was working with FCNL, really settling into what it meant to be a young professional and a young Quaker in this world. So it was really saturated across my personal and professional life.
Sure. Yeah.
I was not exactly sure what it meant to be a professional Quaker, what it meant to be a young friend externally, but what it meant for me. And the touch points that I was struggling with were these kind of really big parts of the faith, the peace testimony, the distinction of what friends are in the world, and silent worship that we base our meeting for worship off of. Um, so that was the first iteration of what this piece was. But after a couple of months, when I realized that this was a piece that I wanted to extend and I wanted to understand more deeply what kind of Quaker I am was, I realized that I really had to start with some of my history, with growing up as a birthright Quaker, what that meant,
Yeah.
what it didn't mean for my practice as a friend. Um, and then I had to actually remember what Quakerism was bringing to my life, not only what it was making me struggle with.
Mhm.
And yeah, and this piece kind of sharpened my identity as a Quaker, really formed it. I wasn't identifying as a Quaker, even though I was saying, oh yeah, I went to Earlham College. Oh yeah, my
You had all these
friend,
Quaker touch points, yeah, but you're
all
not
of
sure.
those Quaker touch points,
Yeah.
but I didn't feel like I had this special ingredient of like, oh yes, I am a Quaker. And in writing this piece and in coming to the end of this year with FCNL, I've thus forth extended the year, so I have another year to continue doing this wonderful work.
Okay.
But I finally settled into what it means to be a Quaker and that there's space for me to do this questioning and also to engage in this discourse with other friends that I know struggle with a lot of these things as well.
Sure. And I think one of the reasons that this resonated with me is I don't have the same backgrounds that you have, the same identities, but we all, I think, have identities like this that we struggle with. And I mean, I've known people who have been like Quakers for 40 years and, they've got the white hair and they still struggle with all these same questions. So I think that's almost part of the Quaker identity is to is even to wonder whether we are being proper Quakers is like almost part of the Quaker identity. So tell me what you're thinking on some of those issues. I mean, the peace testimony has been a struggle for a lot of people, especially with the world events, the invasion in Ukraine, what's happening in Palestine and Israel. It's a really thorny question. How have you been struggling with that?
Yeah, and so this is a discussion of the peace testimony that was started throughout my time at Earlham, really sitting with it. Earlham has a great population of international students, so a lot of these conversations, we had Israel-Palestine events while I was at Earlham. So this was in 2019 to 2023. So before the violence of October 7th this past year occurred. So it was in the air, but I wasn't tuned in. So I knew that there was harm and I knew that there was violence happening, but honestly, it wasn't affecting me in my day-to-day life.
Hmm.
And as I was searching, as many friends or people of all faiths do, there was something missing in this peace testimony of glorifying peace within the Quaker tradition. And I really started to have some deep concerns about what peace meant and what peace looked like.
Yeah.
Peace for whom? Peace with whom? Because especially as friends within the silence, within our communities, we sometimes forget to bring in those loud voices and to bring in those cries and those people that are really struggling because as we know with some young friends, some children, they're talking, their loud noises can be disruptive to the silence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was one of the big things that I continue to struggle with Quakerism. I found so much value in settling into silence, in having that time to reflect and listen for the divine in me and the divine in others. I love listening to people speak because it's a little kernel of truth in this world that we really struggle to make space for, at least I found in this world with technology and with news and all those things happening. But sometimes I've experienced that we prioritize the silence, that
Mm-hmm.
we think that that is what peace looks like, when in reality, it's a part of peace. But if people are screaming and crying and asking for help across the world, and instead of responding, instead of being tuned into that, we're turning our heads away and
Hmm.
putting ourselves in a room to protect our own peace, that's not what peace looks like or feels like to me. Um, so I still struggle with that, and
Hmm.
something that was brought up while I was at Earlham was that sometimes rejecting violence, saying that I will not engage in any type of pushback and any type of sometimes even harmful discourse is stopping us from moving through these really challenging, these really large or harmful systems.
Hmm.
And I see that happening with what's going on in Israel and Palestine and what's going on in the spreading regional war, because it's
Yeah.
spreading out to Lebanon and Iran, and the United States has always been involved in that conflict, supporting Israel's actions. And by saying that that is a problem for people across an ocean, and that we're going to focus on what our community needs internally, we're disconnecting from what's going on. And I'm off on a little bit of a tangent, but
No, that's fine. I mean, another point you put out it was the sort of the freedom to question, which
mhm,
I think is probably related to the peace testimony. So,
mhm.
how have you been struggling with the freedom to question? Is it question, Quaker orthodoxies, Quaker answers? What have you been trying to question?
So yeah, so I grew up, as I said, I grew up a Quaker, which doesn't have a lot of strict beliefs. It doesn't have, you have to do this, you have to do that in order to be a Quaker. And I find that interesting that even though I grew up in a very liberal Quaker tradition, I grew up within the liberal tradition,
Yeah.
I was still pushing back against this idea of God and this idea that there is this all-powerful person.
Mhm.
And I didn't know how to integrate that into how I was walking in the world and how I continue to, because I've learned it's a continual process. The
Mhm.
reflecting and the understanding of how we are connected to the people around us. And I've learned through my other experiences with religions that sometimes putting all of that power to a higher power can be somewhat of a scapegoat, can be, oh, God is going to figure these out for me.
Mhm.
Um, I'm going to rely on the structure of the church or of the clergy to decide how I'm going to walk in this world. And that never fit with me. I've always had a little bit of a rebellious spirit. And I wanted to understand what I was doing and understand what impact it was going to have on the way I'm walking in the world and talking with anyone that I come upon the street. And I'm really grateful, as I say in this piece, that I had the space to do that, that my parents felt confident enough in their own practice that they didn't have to force it onto me,
Oh,
that
that's
they
great. Yeah. Mhm.
this has value for me and it has had value for my family, but you don't have to believe what I believe in order for it to have value. And as I'm discovering what kind of faith practice I want to engage in, what spirituality looks like to me, it's liberating to not feel like
Mhm.
one, I have to impose a specific set of beliefs upon myself in any moment of my life, but I have the space to really question it continuously, to understand as events like the war in Israel and Gaza is unfolding, to understand what faith and what God looks like in each of those moments.
Mhm.
And and sometimes it's scary because I don't know
Yeah.
what it's going to look like
Sometimes
or
we're
what it's
left
going
in
to
the
feel.
mystery of it. Yeah. There are no easy answers.
Yeah.
Sure. And so how's that faith practice been going? You're moving around, you started in media, you were at Durham, now you're in Washington there with FCNL. So do you have a solid faith community that you found, and how have you been um how have you been managing the faith community? A local meeting or shared interest groups with the FCNL colleagues. Tell us a little bit about your faith journey right now.
So my faith journey has been very much tied into my work at FCNL. So the community here is incredibly supportive
Right.
and I encourage anyone who has the opportunity to work with FCNL in any capacity, and I'm saying this not
Hmm.
as a staff of FCNL, but really as someone who has been connected to FCNL before I was even employed here. My family always had the Love Thy Neighbor posters, and it was, I think, subconsciously in the back of my head that this was really important work over the past 80 years and will most likely continue to be. Unfortunately, we do try to work ourselves out of a job, but
Yeah.
it's not looking so great at the moment. Um, but this community has felt really supportive. There's all of the staff here are here because they want to be here, and many of them have been here for 5+ years, which is kind of uncommon within the nonprofit world. But it's these people exploring, even if they're Quaker, even if they're not Quaker, what their work is doing in the world and reacting to what's going on the Hill, reacting to what's going on within our grassroots communities, and then interacting with all of that and finding the place that they can make the most impact, that they can use their skills um, to improve the world.
Yeah.
And I think this community has been somewhat of a spiritual grounding point because I really want to make an impact with my time on this earth,
Hmm.
however long, however short. And the challenge is that there are so many ways to do that. And there are so many ways you can do that in a way that isn't spiritually grounding. And I've really struggled with that about giving too much of myself to the point where it's sometimes the opposite of helpful. the giver syndrome that some people
Sure. Yeah.
call it. Um,
You do also need to keep those spaces for the waiting, the silence in
mhm,
your professional life as well, if you're doing this kind of work.
mhm. And having the position as the program assistant and now program associate for Quaker engagement, I feel like I am able to engage my Quaker toolbox in a professional sense and bring it into spaces where sometimes we forget that we have those tools in every moment of our life.
Mhm.
Um, the professional time clock, the to-do lists that are always coming, and sometimes just remembering in a moment, in a meeting that's sometimes getting a little bit tense, that we can take a moment of silence, that we don't have to rush to a decision because in that moment we think that we have an internal time clock, we have a decision that we have to make,
Mhm.
and sometimes that is true, but sometimes we just think that that is true.
Yeah,
And in reality, we can take that moment to step back, to reflect on what path we've been continuing on, and also if we really need to change course. And
sure.
that can be a beautiful way to think bigger about the work that we're doing and the work that we sometimes need to be doing, specifically at FCNL with the bigger picture.
Mhm. Well, it's a way of respecting everyone in the room, and if there's anxieties or differences, just to say, all right, let's stop, let's talk about what some of that is. So it's also can just be an act of love just to stop in those moments and uh, kind of stop going on the agenda and figure out, maybe a little bit, open a little space for what can be done to reconnect with one another.
Yeah, precisely. I'm a big fan of what people in the business world call maintenance tasks, of engaging with people as people, because that's what has to come first. And we forget that sometimes,
Yeah,
because we're in a world of do on this times table, and doing this work and centering a spiritual practice within the professional world has been incredibly life-giving. And I don't know where I'm going to go after FCNL. I'm looking at going back to school and going back to seminary, actually, because I've really settled into this interfaith calling of what are the interdimensional ways that God or spirit or this interconnected energy flows through all of our communities, whether we can recognize it
sure.
or not.
Mhm.
And I'm looking out at my office just because there's a lot of light here with
Mhm.
doing collective work, but also holding each other as people. And it's been such a gift.
That's great. So you're going to be at FCNL though for another year. You've re-upped for another year. Great. And
Mhm.
and how can uh since you're Quaker engagement, how can friends and friends of friends engage with FCNL? Are there interesting projects you're doing on the or ongoing projects that you're doing?
There are always ongoing projects. So fcnl.org/updates is a wonderful short link. If anyone wants any of those updates, it's continuously, um, things are continuously coming in.
Yeah.
I do also hold a weekly Witness Wednesday worship with FCNL from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern time. And we have hosts come weekly. They bring a prompt and a query or queries for the group to reflect on. And this is actually a space that I wrote a little bit about for a blog post with FCNL about a year walking his way opens as the title of the blog post. And that community has been one of the highlights of my time here at FCNL. It's not the first time, but it's a continuous time that I felt spirit enter into virtual
Mm.
meeting spaces, which can be a little bit more difficult
Be a
and
challenge, yeah. Yeah.
a bit challenging. And that's been a joy. And then we also have our bi-monthly Quaker Changemaker series, which brings in people talking about their witness in the world and talking about the work that they're doing, usually from a Quaker or faith perspective. And then sometimes we pull in our lobbyists or people doing some of the grassroots community work across the country. And that's just been a wonderful opportunity to uplift the voices of people doing this work, because I think that sometimes in DC we can get so focused on what's happening here in the city, what's happening in Congress, on the Hill, that
Mhm.
we forget to look and to listen to the communities across the country where this is really hitting home and uplifting those stories and the work that people are doing.
Great. Well, I'll look those up and put them in the show notes here, those links. Um, so why don't, in conclusion, See, can you give a one-word answer? What kind of Quaker am I? What would your one word or maybe three-word answer be? What have you come to?
I think my answer to this question of what kind of Quaker am I is I am a Quaker,
Hmm?
and I'm going to continuously be discovering what that means to my life, and I might continue to step away or step in the community
Mhm.
throughout my years. Um, but naming that has been a powerful experience in and of itself.
Great. Well, I'm glad you feel comfortable naming that. And I hope this is inspiring because, like I say, all of us have questions about the various testimonies and our identities, and I think it's common to sort of go in and out. So, thank you for just being really open about your processes and sharing it with us today.
Yeah, and thank you for using it to share with others, and hopefully the story, my truths, can help inspire others to look critically or lovingly at their own practice.
Great. Well, thanks, Micah. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Martin.